Hello, testing. Can everyone hear me? Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. There's not a lot of you, but we're so happy that you came and joined us here today for this discussion on diversity in the tech industry. Obviously, it's a little early in the year for us to be giving anybody a report card, a letter, but it was a really cool title, so we went with it. Just to let you know how this next hour is going to go, we're going to chat for the first 20 minutes. I'm going to ask the panel some questions, hear from them and their experiences. We're not going to make that too long because we really want to make this more about the conversation within this room. We want to hear about your experiences, of course, your questions, but we are here to learn from each other, I think, at the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to start by asking our panelists to tell us who you are, what you do, and a little bit about why you're here to talk about this today. What has you interested so much in this topic? Please.
Me too, or ladies first?
You gotta switch it, I think.
Did you turn it on?
No. I know.
There you go.
Test. Hi. Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Fredo de Smet. I work at the VRT, which is a public broadcaster in Belgium. It's for the Dutch-speaking parts in Belgium. You might not know there's two parts in Belgium, which is a long story. And there I'm the curator of a festival on innovation, media and technology called Media Fast Forward. And next to that, I don't like to sleep much. So next to that, I'm the author of the book Artificial Stupidity, which is a manual for digital humanism. So that's why I'm happy to be here. I'm quite an ambassador for putting the humans in the center of the industry again.
Okay. Cool. Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. First off, thank you, Heidi, for inviting me to be here, and Capital Factory for sponsoring it and inviting all of us to be here to talk about this important topic. My name is Dory Alexander. I have been at Google working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for the last 6 years. And before that, I was at Apple, and before that, I worked on Capitol Hill in DC in legislative affairs. So I think the thread here is just always been interested in advocacy and how I can use my voice to help people specifically in my community, whether that's through policies at the government level or now at a private company with the internal policies. So, and the reason why I'm here is because I'm Haitian American. I grew up in Haiti and then moved to the States when I was 14 years old. So I am a daughter and niece and cousin of immigrants who came to the country. So I think a part of it is me feeling a lot of responsibility to do the work that I do, just because I know a lot of people sacrifice a lot for me to be here. But there's also the part of wanting to give back, pay it forward to other people so they can have the same opportunity. So that's one piece of why I'm here. And being from Haiti, a country that people like to talk about in terms of poverty, but I see it more as a country of resilience and resistance, and I would like to mirror that in my life too, moving forward and ensuring that I sort of do the same thing for everyone else, give them a voice, and especially black and brown folks around the world, and at my company right now at Google to give them a voice. So that's why I'm here. I also promised myself that I was going to speak to more panels this year. So when Heidi reached out, I said yes. So that's why I'm here.
Very nice. Can you hear me? Does it work?
Yep.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. My name is Dimitris Karamitsos. Flew from Europe this morning, so if I look a little bit tired, that's why. So my background, I'm an engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer at Source, and I work for a company called Spot. We develop AI and machine learning tools to analyze what's happening inside digital imagery so that we combine e-commerce with digital content so that whoever wants to discover what's happening inside video or pictures, you can simply touch on your screen and you discover, you feel inspired by what is happening inside the content, right? So as I said, my background is a little bit very diverse. So I'm an engineer initially. I worked many years in industry for a big company called General Electric. And I saw that at the beginning of my career, there has been, since I was a student, really a big issue on diversification, both from a gender perspective as well from an ethnicity perspective. So I think it's really a topic highly important today, since I trust we've reached a level in our society where we can spend the effort to understand the past, where we came from, and how we can improve to go towards the future. So I trust this conversation, this panel today was very interesting, so that's why I'm here to discuss it.
Well, thank you. I just realized I didn't even say who I was. Sorry about that. Don't mean to show my back to you guys either. I'm Heidi Hoover, and I work for Flanders Investment and Trade. We're basically the commercial department for the Flanders region of Belgium, which, if you're not familiar with Belgium, that's the northern Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. So it's really interesting to hear a little bit about what brings you here today, and I was hoping we could maybe flesh that out a little bit more, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about challenges you've faced with regards to this directly, or maybe challenges about diversity inclusion that you've witnessed that made an impression on you.
Who's going to go first?
I can give a simple example,
Sure.
and then we can continue and make it interactive. Yeah, one of the, of course, now in the smaller company that I work for, Spot, which is a scale-up, we're trying to make it work from the start. But if I look at my experience in General Electric, for instance, one basic example of people not being used to diversification, both from a gender perspective and also from an ethnicity, brings a lot of inefficiencies at work. Because as companies grow globally and offices are opening, like in South America, in Asia, etc., and you have people, for instance, I'm based in Switzerland, which is a very small country, and suddenly they have to work with South Americans. It's a completely different culture. They don't know how to interact, and they keep complaining instead of trying to find solutions. And so you see here the resultants of not being used. It's not a negative side, but it's just not being used to actually interact with different cultures. Your mindset is blocked. And so I think here we have an opportunity to go at the source and educate people from the beginning to interact with different mindsets. Because it brings actually more value in the business. Because at the end of the day, who's using the products we develop, it's the people. So the more you understand the people, the more the product is going to be better. So
Do people look similar like me? We all look the same. Educated, high educated people, women or men, white people. So it's hard to really talk about these issues because we're also always talking about an issue that is actually strange to us. And by saying this, one, it means there is a dominant culture and you need to be aware of it, and you also need to be aware of it that it's just your dominant culture. Two, there is, and it's a European thing, by the way, in the big media companies, there's a lack of diversity. Too many people who are working in the companies that are having the biggest voices or the biggest megaphones to the society are dominated by white people. So at the company level, we have there's some work to do. Because otherwise we will be talking about these issues from a perspective as a stranger, as a journalist, as an investigator, not as something who has experienced these issues.
Thanks.
And I can add, I could speak a lot about my personal experience because I've definitely seen a lot, both growing up in a country that is predominantly black, with black leaders, black folks, in leadership positions, and then come into the U.S. where, I was still in my teenage years, so not truly, grasping yet, that shift that happened in my life when I came here, so I could speak about that. But I think from a work perspective, I would say there's a lot of challenges. I mean, there's, on the product side, my colleague Annie is actually here, and she works a lot with our product teams to figure out how to create more diverse sort of products that reach everyone. My colleague Frances is here, she focuses a lot on the kind of trainings that we do, and again, thinking early on how to embed diversity in the trainings and not have it as something separate, right? That people have to do on top and that is optional, right? Yeah. Thinking ahead of time around how we can get managers and leaders to understand what it means to create inclusive spaces. So there's a lot of challenges that we're trying to solve. It's really endless. I could go all day, really.
Yeah.
Could I ask you something?
Yeah.
Do you have any numbers on, for example, the engineering part of Google? How diverse is it? Because many of the high educated, young, talented developers are white.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what you see. We publish our numbers. I think we've published them consistently since 2014, and it pretty much looks very white, white male, very Asian and male as well. So in Silicon Valley, that's what you can expect to see across many companies.
You guys, Google came out with that last year, how they were doing, and I think that also sparked a lot of discussions. How many of you have been to a diversity and inclusion discussion at South by so far? So, see, it's the buzz. We're all talking about it, and I know a lot of people saw those numbers from Google last year and were like, uh-oh. Google, who is, the company everyone's looking up to, they have problems. But what I liked about it was the honesty. They put it out there, and they said, hey, this is a discussion we're having. So I'm going to be looking forward to hearing from you two to hear what you're doing. I think that's so interesting. There's been a lot published about statistics. And I was reading a document about how they were polling people in companies and they were asking them about their awareness about diversity and inclusion. What do you think about it? They all agree there's an issue. But there seems to be this gap between knowing about it and doing something about it. What do you guys think in terms of what are companies doing wrong? What can they maybe do better to help bridge the gap?
Yeah, I can start. I think one sort of thing that we tend to do is to think that diversity is completely separate from everything else that we do. So it's like the thing that you do after you do the essential things that you're supposed to do: core sales, core product development, and I think that's why we end up seeing, products that fail or don't reach the population that we want them to sort of reach. So I think one thing that we should be doing is thinking about how can we embed it from the beginning. And it's not like, hey, bring someone from the diversity team to invest some time and tell me what to do. It's like you learn what it would take to create better products, and you do it. And that becomes part of your day-to-day job. It's not something else that you have to bring in. It's not someone that you have to bring in. And we are far from being able to do that, but I think we should be able to do it. And I think we have an opportunity with startups, for example, to sort of embed that early on so that we don't have to correct mistakes later. Another way that I see it happening is specifically around racial equity, because that's what I focus on, is people not realizing how uncomfortable you have to be for change to happen. It's sort of like, yes, I want to do this. I want to be diverse. I want to have all kinds of people here, but I don't want to change who I am. I don't want to change how I do things. I want to just keep doing the same things. Just bring them in and, they'll figure it out, right? And for change to happen, regardless of what you're talking about, like me, speaking more on panels means that I can become more comfortable and do more of them over time, right? So I have to make myself uncomfortable to just get better at it. And I think, again, companies, they have to start talking about it and really embracing being in a space of being uncomfortable, because we preach about innovation and how we should do it, but you can't have innovation unless you can be out there trying something that you've never tried before. So I think that's why you probably see some discrepancies between, the beliefs that people say, hey, I want to do this, and then they don't actually follow through with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another thing is we could discuss today is legislation, because sometimes I do have the feeling that in the US, for example, people are obsessed with the idea of freedom. And next to freedom, there is certainty. I mean, you can go on holiday and travel around and wander around and not decide what to do. That's really beautiful idea. But if you're broke, that's a dreadful idea, because you're going to spend money and you don't know what's going to happen if you come home. There's no job, there's no home. If you have a job, if you have a good place to go home, it's easier to go on holiday and be free. So freedom and certainty are really connected. And there's the question. In Europe, we try to combine them, legislate things, or organize a society where people are free to build a company. And at the level of data protection, for example, the GDPR, it's not the best legislation. It's not the nicest experience to have. In Europe, when you're visiting websites and you have to deal with all the cookies or all the experience about cookies. But at the same time, there is legislation about how to deal with the data, and there's also a way to force companies to deal with this. So maybe there should be more legislation towards diversity. Not only it should not only be something from people like you who are mission-driven, trying to organize try to change the organization from within. But it should also maybe a top-down issue, like it has to be more diverse. It has to be more a mirror of society.
Diverse, but we can't forget the element of inclusion, right? We need that, because inclusion says you're welcome. Not like, okay, we've got all these different people, check. No, it's about this, I think, this attitude within your company culture, your greater culture, of saying, no, you're different, but you're welcomed. Yeah. And I think sometimes, you're talking about legislation, it's tricky.
It is.
How do you bring that element into legislation?
Yeah, it's tricky, but at the same time, unfortunately, like sometimes you need to have a catalyst somewhere that brings a momentum, and then the people potentially realize advantages, and then it becomes part of the DNA, right? Where you feel that you need the advantages of this diversity with an inclusion, right? Because you're right, the definition is very important. Like, what is diversity? Does it mean that we are all different? No, it means we all are with different backgrounds, but we are all the same, right? So we need to feel included as part, as one, work together, etc. So it's a very good point that you're saying. And now I wanted to mention one point there, and now I lost thought of track with something that you mentioned earlier. But anyway, it'll come back to me, so we can follow.
I don't know if it's difficult. It's not difficult, by the way. I really don't believe it's difficult. It's complex. It's truly complex. It's a complex situation, but it's not difficult. It's a matter of making decisions. Google is a perfect example of something that's incredibly complex, but it's not difficult to use. It's really easy to use. All the products of Google are easy to use, but extremely complex at the same time. So it's not difficult. It's a matter of courage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now it came back to me. It's yeah. Actually, you need to have the business environment that drives things, but you need the government that is going to push things forward. So it's actually a commitment from the board level to do things in a serious manner, because very often we're going to say, okay, we need diversification, blah, blah, but people just expect it's going to happen, right? And so like you mentioned, then you have things that come as a priority, like sales, etc., and then diversification becomes like, all right, we're gonna do it someday. Whereas actually it can be done at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it's on the hiring side, etc., on the talent acquisition side, on looking at the right people to put on board, right? Because that's the thing. Diversification is, what is it? It's a link of your own historical background. I mean, I could be myself, like born somewhere in South America. being Greek, being Belgian, but still feel more Argentinian, let's say, right? So it's more about where do you come from, what are your experiences, what are the challenges that you've been experiencing, and so all this builds your mindset, which in a business then brings added value because you're going to have different mindsets on how to look at things, etc.
Yeah.
So, and from a government perspective, if we look at diversification of gender, you need to have a different mindset than we have today. Like I like to take this comparison between the north of Europe and the southern part. For instance, in Denmark, in Sweden, if you have a baby, you can have, as a father, 6 months of paternity leave.
Yeah.
In Switzerland, you have 5 days. So suddenly you feel like, it's the mindset. Like
if you're an entrepreneur, you have no days.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like in Belgium, it's even worse, I think. And so you have the mindset automatically, okay, the father has to provide, right? The father has to work, the father has to, and the mother has to stay at home. Whereas it's not the right mindset that we should have today, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be this equilibrium whereby automatically as well the father feels that it's important for him to be closer to the family, etc.
So you gave a good example of where they're winning. Do we have some other examples, companies, countries where we see them winning this and being a positive example of diversity and inclusion in the world? Or not?
I can think of moments. I can think of actions. I don't know. I don't know that anybody's winning. Well, part of it is because it's a work in progress. I do feel even me as a person who's in the space, I'm learning all the time, right? So it's never something that you're just like, yep, I'm winning, I got it, I'm done. And I'm a Black woman. So if you're someone who has never sort of like touched the topic, you have a long way to go. And it's gonna be a lifelong sort of journey. So I can think of moments or like things. You mentioned courage. And I feel like more recently I can think of, again, no company's perfect, but when Nike stood up with Kaepernick, for example, again, it was something that, some folks would have thought was controversial, but to me, it's like, okay, you do it because you feel like it's the right thing, and it doesn't preclude you from making money from it, right? So how can you show to folks that you can't, just because you stand up for diversity does not mean that, people rise up and like your stocks fall, right? You can actually stand for racial equity and racial justice and actually end up doing much better than before. So I think that's an example of that. Another company, it's a startup, it's a Black-owned startup. I would say Blavity is, I think maybe like 2 to 3 years old, I can't remember. But like, again, you didn't have a seat at the table, so you created your own table, and you decided to create a media platform for Black and brown folks to express themselves. They have Afrotech conference. I go there, my friends go there, and it's like, hey, we have conferences where, we're invited, we know we can be a part of it, even though, we don't see it in other conferences. So I think just being able to have a place where you have a voice and you feel like you don't have to switch it up, you can just be you. So I think that's one way to also do it, to say, hey, I don't have to fit into what you have. I can just go off and create my own. And I'm pretty sure it was tough for them to do that, and it still probably is tough in this industry to stand your ground and say, hey, I only want to do this. But it does take a lot of courage and for you to commit to doing it.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think South by Southwest is winning today or this week. I mean, if you go to a technology conference in Belgium, it's utterly boring and completely unsexy.
Well,
and we might talk about diversity, but it's just a man's world. Well, here it's just beautiful to look at all these different people on the streets. It's not a theme; it's a reality. And the big challenge is now stop talking and start doing stuff.
yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we want to hear from all of you. What do we expect from D&I as far as trends in 2019? Any expectations from any of the panelists? What you think is going to be trending this year?
Trending, hard to say, but what I like to see, at least from a corporate world
Mm-hmm.
is that companies do more, they get more involved on the education side.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I saw one example recently from Microsoft that I really liked. So they're starting doing it, so of course they had to select a few schools, but they were going there and they were doing, offering programming classes, right, to girls and boys, which initially the school would have had to find money to do it, so here they proactively went for it. And I think it's part of a small example, but an important way to try and influence young talents, but as well understand what they are looking for, right? Because I think it's a two-way thing. So I hope we're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
It's hard to the word trend to me. I just think about me and what diversity and inclusion and equity means to me. Like, clearly it's not about trends. I think we should be doing everything that we can do and every day in our lives. So I sort of shy away from the word trend, but I do know based on the work that I do right now, what I would like to see, it's probably because of the challenges that I know that I face, is more sort of like CEO and leadership boards, accountability and commitment to actually do the work themselves. Because I think when you try to convince someone who doesn't understand where you come from, it's just a bigger challenge. It just causes more work for me.
Yeah.
So if they can commit themselves first to doing some of the work, and once they learn, then they can sort of like help other folks also get it, and they can make big decisions. So I think that would make my life easier, and other people's as well. So CEO accountability and yeah, and more white men, on panels talking, not telling women how to fix themselves to like make it, but actually acknowledging the issues that you guys see at the top, like the issues that you see with males and white men, really particularly, and what you're personally doing to sort of change the situation instead of telling people how they should be so they can fit in your world. So I appreciate some of your comments on the panel.
Oh, thanks.
Trends in Europe, there is a clear trend of climate activists, and I saw there is also some teenagers in the US being active and using their voice regarding climate change. And many of these activists are led, these movements are led by young girls, teenagers even, which is beautiful to see. And I think it's a part of the same shift in society we are noticing, focusing to intention, to what's really on stake, instead of only focusing on the industry. So that's a trend. There's a lot of talks about ethics and AI, ethics and technology. I do have a feeling nobody really knows what they're talking about. But still, so I hope it's not a trend. I hope it's something we genuinely try to research and live. And then apart from that, I had another one. Obviously what happened yesterday with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a beautiful trend. Those are ladies, young ladies, who are changing the system from within, because they came from without. She found her own community on Instagram, and now she's in within. Yeah. And she's not the only one. There are a couple of young ladies in Congress. That is from a European standpoint, I'm jealous about this. Genuinely jealous about it.
Do you think it's inspiring for people in Europe seeing this happening?
Yeah, so many friends are jealous. Were jealous last night because we saw her. Yeah. We are following it with a big class. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think also sometimes as I'm an American, we kind of forget the responsibility we have influencing, and how, a lot of countries are looking maybe not up to us or across at us to see what's going on here. And I'm so glad to hear that that's a positive thing that's across the ocean and inspiring people as well.
Actually, I have a question for my panelists. I think you could be helpful. I have a question for you guys. because I do, actually, I hear a lot of pushback a lot around like, you know, race and ethnicity is not relevant, you know, in other places, you know, outside the U.S. It's not. Can you tell me your perspective on this? Because I know that is not the case, but it is something that it seems like some folks outside of the U.S. might feel like this is not important. There's other things that are important or relevant. It's not relevant here. Can you tell me your point of view around that? Since you.
What's the question exactly?
The question is, do you think race is important outside of the U.S. and why?
Well, I'm happy that you rephrased the question, or you just repeat the question. You didn't rephrase. Race is important. Racism is a different thing, and sometimes people don't know the difference between racism and race. And race should be in everything. When I travel to work using public transport, I see so many different races or people from a different background in Brussels, which is beautiful, and it's just something. It's the banality of it that it's making it beautiful. At the same time, on a company level, not many of the people are actually going to the VRT. Not my colleagues enough. Racism is a different thing. It's something we should discuss with big capitals. There's no banality about it. There's just something we should be hard on. So yeah, it is. There is work to be done, but it shouldn't be so big. It's just like, yeah, let's fix it. Let's do more with people with a different background. Let's stop talking about it and just doing it. It's been too long. And actually we are at the VRT, by the way. There's many initiatives regarding how can we reach young people from suburban areas with different backgrounds. And instead of talking about them, we are trying to make content with them and let them use their voice and help them to create their own channel on Instagram or on YouTube. But that's a bit late. I mean, it's not that they just arrived last year.
Yeah, well, better late than never,
Many
right?
of them, yeah. Well. But race is it's a big thing we need to work on, but it's not a big issue. It's just like something you need to be aware of every day, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think also what is important is, you know, we took the example of climate change. A lot of people, let's say, who just hear the buzzword climate change, they go like, yeah, okay, there's not really a climate change. I mean, it snowed last week, it's fine, right? They have to realize, okay, you know, like there is an education process that we need to show to people the facts, right? These are the facts. There is indeed climate change. This is the direction we're going to. We need to do something about it, blah, blah. And it's the same about diversity. So diversity, we can talk about it. We say, oh, yeah, okay, but I mean, I don't really feel it, right? I'm inside my day-to-day job. I might travel here and there. I mean, I'm being, like you said, like in my position, like a privileged position, especially us, we don't really feel it, right? We don't feel the challenge for us. We don't feel except if we expressively communicate and search to engage with these histories around us. So I think it's also important to educate the people on the facts. For instance, like on the sea level, there are 94% of white male, which are sea level. I think it's maybe a bit less than 94%, but it's above the 90%, right? And on the beginning level, it's more equilibrated. It's 50-50%, but then we see a trend whereby as it goes up, like it decreases, right? And the white male increases. Why is that, right? Understanding why and what is happening. Same for what is happening in case you have a more diverse business. What is the impact on the business? So we see that, for instance, statistics show that you have 34%, I think, more possibility of having a successful business if it's diverse, right? And so these are facts and figures that need to be shared with people within an organization from top down, C-level and down, so that people realize, okay, there is really a benefit out of it, and for the people that are skeptical, right, and that don't want to embrace it, so to say.
Yeah.
Because indeed, we are a society which are economically driven. So some of us are more, let's say, have a more developed EQ, so we can embrace it more easily. But for people who are more IQ driven, they need to see the figures, they need to see blah, blah. So we need to also understand this profiles and then communicate it in a way that everybody engages.
Right. But I want to be a little more critical before we go to you guys. There's one more thing I want to be critical about. What are you guys, I'm putting you on the hot seats, doing in your day-to-day lives? How are you engaging day-to-day with your colleagues about this discussion? Or not?
Not enough. Not enough. So I curate this festival, and we had over 15 different sessions in one day. And the intention was to make it a diverse program. And then reality happens. And then you come across interesting names with interesting portfolio or interesting stories. And I was just working until 1 month ago, and my schedule, my program was almost ready for 75%, and 80% were men.
Oops.
Yeah, because that's what happens if you just look at at what's on the menu almost. So not enough. I was actually making this, saying this to myself, like that's not good enough. But this year, on the 12th of November, it's going to be better. Then again, I actually enjoy taking public transport, and I try to make little connections over there. And I truly believe, maybe I'm a hippie here, but I truly believe if you do this, if you swap your car for public transport and search for public spaces and try to make little connections, you can have a big impact on like micro level.
Some good advice. Day to day.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot feel it better than Dimitris did. I mean, it's true. We don't do enough every day.
I'm not trying to shame you.
No,
I just,
I feel very.
I just want to say what everybody's thinking.
No, it's true.
And I think we all have to look in the mirror every day. I'm pointing at myself too. We have to look in the mirror every day and think about this. So with that, I would like to open it up to our audience and give you guys a chance to either ask questions or share from your own experiences. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I really enjoyed this panel. And when I think about like a diversity report card, I think of it in like 3 levels where there's like diversity, a lot of that's happening at like the recruitment level, just opening up the pipeline. Then there's inclusion, a lot of that is focused on improving culture so that you retain that talent. But then there's like the equity component that I would argue is the most important, which is making sure that those people actually move up. and I think across the board, even in companies that I think are putting great practices in place at the diversity and inclusion level, they still at the top tier levels in terms of who's making decisions don't look great. And so I'm just wondering, like if you found any kind of strategies in tackling that. I know there's some startups that actually have kind of like data-driven ways for larger companies where they can actually look at a breakdown in gender and race and how much people are compensated over time to say like, hey, you actually have bias built into your company. But I'm wondering if there's any kind of smaller things that don't require your company to have several thousand people to be able to say, hey, there's clearly something going on here. How can we make sure that our diverse workforce that we're bringing in also are moving up?
I mean, one thing that we are doing is looking at the intersections, as you mentioned. I think maybe when we first started publishing our numbers up until maybe a year or so ago, we would not break it down further. So we'd be like, women are right here, men are right here, but you don't actually look through to see, what's going on in the deeper layers. What's going on with Black women, what's going on with Latinx women, what's going on with Indigenous women, what's going on with trans women, all of it. And I think that's where you start seeing, some disparities as well. So to your point, for you to address equity, you really have to go a little deeper. Yes, you have to address equity between men and women, but you also, when you look at gender, you have to make sure everyone's also treated the same. So I totally agree with you. I think everyone, when they look at all their data, whether that's attrition or hiring, you should definitely go deeper to see where am I missing the mark or where am I doing the best that I could be doing. So I think that's super important. What else? And I mean, my day-to-day is mainly on racial equity and especially looking at people processes. So as you mentioned, the hiring process. So all these different ways that you bring people into the company and like nurture them into the company, you have to pay a lot of attention, because if you spent 20 plus years building a company not thinking about that, there is a strong possibility that this whole time you were building something that is not going to work for where you want to be, if where you want to be in the future is to be a more diverse, inclusive place. So you have to go back and look at all the decisions that you made, all the assumptions that you made. One example I know Google did, so when Google first started, even before I even joined Google, and you probably heard that too, it's like, hey, we hire from Harvard and Stanford, and we only hire the cream of the crop from those schools because that's where the smart people are. And it was like, completely flawed, right? Because it's that assumption that somehow smart people are only at those institutions, right? And if you had recruiters these days still doing the same thing, they wouldn't be looking at me right now because I didn't go to Harvard and I didn't go to Stanford. It's not because I'm not smart, right? It's literally because I don't want to be in the cold. I don't want to be far away from home, and like I wanted to be down the street from my mom. In Atlanta, had a carnival where I met other Haitian people, and I was like, oh, that's where I want to be. It had absolutely nothing to do with whatever the heck Google thought it was about. So I think you can find smart people literally everywhere, whether that's community colleges, anywhere. So thinking more broadly around what assumptions went into a lot of the decisions that I made when I was not thinking about this when I should have been. And then go back and rediscover those and change them, because there's a lot of them already embedded in how we all do things, and we should be rethinking them.
Yeah. There's a lot of small companies that are kind of trying to figure out how to recruit and where to look for, and it's new for them. And I open this up to the audience too. Maybe some of you have some experience with recruiting and looking for diverse talent. And I was wondering if anyone has recommendations or advice for smaller companies that are doing that. Maybe not as large as Googles of the world that have a lot of resources to do so, but just maybe smaller startups and or scale-ups. Anybody have experience?
Something that we discovered here at Capital Factory is a thing that everyone loved to say was, we like to hire people we know, and once you get in with us, we'll take care of you for life. The problem is, the tech industry is so white and so male. So we have a really hard time with that, and we have had to kind of find a way to explain to leadership why that maybe isn't the best model. So on that note, I do have a question about just what's a realistic way to have a conversation with someone who's potentially maybe a little more old school, maybe above my pay grade. This is an at-will state. How do I not get fired for being like, hey guys, let's look at this differently? What's a real way that I can do that? I don't care if I piss people off, but I would like to get paid.
Yeah. And not get fired, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's hard for me to answer this because I come from a different culture, and in this regard, Europe is a completely different culture, both from the standpoint of education. It's much easier to find higher education in Belgium. You don't end your education with a debt. It's more democratized. And at the same, also, there is a bigger history of unions. It's really quite difficult for an employer to say you should look for another job. He really needs an argument, so you are more protected. So that's a different thing. But at the same time, what I come to the situation where I want to change the hierarchy or the bosses of my employers, and then the best thing is to work out an idea and propose it in this way that they believe it's their idea, and then let go of your own ideas and give them ownership. And even if they say, I have this great idea, 1 month later, don't say, no, that was my idea. Just acknowledge, now that's a good idea. So it's no, it's not manipulation, but it's something next to that. Give ownership to the bosses of your ideas and let them go. Let go of control.
And maybe if you get lucky, because it's not always the case, if you can find within the company an ambassador that has, let's say, from a seniority level, maybe a little bit lower than that person, or potentially the same, and if he or she is more open-minded, then that person could, funnel also that idea towards that person. We do the same, for instance, if you, I know it's a different topic, but if you're looking to sign, let's say, a contract with a very big company, and you don't know the C-levels, then typically you look for ambassadors within the company that can bring that idea internally without that it's you selling that idea to the C-level. So that might sometimes work, but yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky.
Do you want to chime in?
I could add. Yeah. So I would say one thing that we do on my team and is that we try to think strategically when we how and when and to whom we're gonna approach different topics, right? Because we work specifically around racial equity. You already know it's a topic that people are not comfortable with, right? So you can't just go in there and be like, yeah, well, here's what I think, and then just spill everything out. You will get fired very fast. We also want to have jobs, but we also want to be able to push the conversation forward. It's uncomfortable. You do risk your job every day. We talk about it all the time. Like, we literally have conversation around, okay, so if you get fired, what's going to happen? But if you're strategic about it and you know what the pain points are, you know what people want, and you sit down and try to figure out, okay, if we want this, what conversation needs to happen first so we can have this conversation and bring this person along. You really have to bring other folks along. And really, I mean, for you to do it, you'd have to be willing to lose your job, but act as if you don't want to lose it, right? So it's like, hey, I'm willing to do it, but I'm not really trying to do it tomorrow. So what can I do to still challenge folks, but make sure that I'm doing it in a very smart way and strategic way so that people don't come for me tomorrow. So it's like alliance with other folks who are on board with what you want to do, but also sitting down and plotting how we're going to do this.
Anyone else have anything they want to share? They want to ask a question? Please.
So we keep hearing about a shortage of tech skills in some industries, and a lot of companies like to look outside of their borders for workers. But of course, in the U.S., we know that they're trying to make immigration more restrictive. And as an employer, let's say you want to be really socially responsible, you want a lot of cultural and ethnic diversity. If you are saying, I'll give you a visa, you can come live here, sometimes as someone from another culture, that sounds a little bit like, you can work for me if you do what I want and you're part of this culture. But if you just outsource the job, sometimes that feels like, you can work for me for a lower wage and over there, but I don't want to see you in my office, which sounds a little bit like colonialism. How do we balance that? That's so complex.
Interesting question.
That's a tricky one.
Stump me, sorry.
You broke the panel.
Reboot.
Well, I'm not officially the panel, but I think what you touched earlier, we've got to start electing new people, first of all, to show how this country is going to go forward. I think that affects a lot of business. Obviously, these people are making decisions right now about how we're treating people who are wishing to immigrate here. This all, I think, has an effect on everyone. So it trickles down to the workplace and people making business decisions.
I have a
about
question
hiring.
for Dimitris.
Oh.
What am I correct that a couple of years ago you had your company had employers in a different part of Europe?
Birth.
Employers that you were outsourcing some part of development to Eastern Europe?
Ah, yes, correct.
Are you still doing this?
Now we are shifting towards either that they come home at the headquarters, but we want people to be closer.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it was, of course, more, let's say, comfortable because we had to find the talents and we had to grow fast. So that's part of the reason why it was done. But then on the long term, it's important to have the persons locally. Yeah. For a certain time, and then of course, well, it's a software business, so then it also means that people can be remote. But it's different from to understand the culture of the company, right? So that's why it's important to have the people, to see them often, so to say.
So that is something I see. I see happening in Belgium more and more actually. Companies, startups want to grow. They start outsourcing, but then they change over to more valuable force of people who can help grow the company when they scale up, such as a Spot, which is already a scale up in our terms, not in US terms. But so it is obviously a difficult question, but don't stare at it. Stop staring at it and try to ask the questions that are underneath these issues. And what is underneath it, in my opinion, is that the valuta of these companies is not how much value are we creating for everybody, but how fast are we growing in regard to our competitors. And if speed is the only parameter, that's a dangerous situation. If happiness or intention is also a parameter, humanism, that's a better world. So that's what we need to talk about.
That's why it's tricky, like Europe, since the purpose of Europe was built for this, right? To have, let's say, borders without borders.
Free movement.
Exactly, so people can go from France to Germany, etc., etc. In US, it's already a very big country, so it's also difficult to manage such a big country, right? It's from size perspective, it's bigger than Europe. So then, how do you? The problem is potentially even more difficult to handle with policies, etc. I mean, you know, Switzerland as well, for instance, is super small, so everything works in Switzerland. But how do you? That's also another question. How do you scale up a country so that it works, right?
Yeah.
And as well, we have to say that Switzerland is super rigid on its borders, right? So, but that's another topic.
For another day. Anyone else today? All right, well, I'm going to just close up the session, and I first want to say thank you for everybody coming today. Oh, I'm sorry. Please.
Okay, I got here a little late, so if you guys already covered this, then totally fine.
It's okay.
I was wondering if you've seen a change, like with the amount of coding boot camps and stuff like that that's coming up. If you've seen like a more diverse group of people entering.
The boot camps, huh?
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
there's more boot camps now, do we see more diverse talent coming into the industry?
I like the question, and so the boot camps that have been recently too, I do see a change, and I think, well, at least the ones I've been to. So if it's different, if your experience is different, please share it. But also for startups, I think it's an advantage for the startups to find talents because they don't have the budget, let's say, to hire like a headhunter or to look at hiring at people from Harvard, etc., which, I mean, the price will be higher. So as a result, we look at talents in more, let's say, remote areas like boot camps, etc., which I think corporates should start to do more and more.
Yeah. So I will say, again, the hiring problem is not necessarily a pipeline problem. So the boot camp is sort of solving for that, which is great. It's always great to have more talent. If your hiring process is still not one that allows people of color get through it, they're still not going to get through it regardless of where they come from. In fact, if they still can't put Harvard on their resume and they put this boot camp and you decide that somehow the boot camp is not as good and lowering the bar, then you're still not going to hire them. So I think that's an issue in itself. That again, that's why you need to focus on the processes and the things that you've created that have really kept people out of your company, not them. A lot of it is you as a company. So I think in that way it doesn't affect it. I think it is great, for people, especially people who are transitioning or looking to build their skills. I think it's great for them to have the opportunity. So I've definitely seen a lot more of those. But I have also heard the challenge of especially people of color who have gone through the programs, but then trying to move on because then they're told to do internships. Again, that's not very helpful economically. It's a great experience, but someone else who might have done the boot camp, or has the same skills, they might get a full-time job. So I think there are challenges again that you have to think about of what that means when you do those. So I fully encourage folks to have boot camps, especially for children, to get them interested. I think that's great. But let's also solve for the other things that will still get in the way of folks who have completed the boot camps once they are done and when they graduate and when they have spent all this money learning some skills that they can apply. So I think we just have to be thoughtful about how we approach it.
Did you know Google is doing boot camps in Brussels?
No.
In Molenbeek, which is like...
I'm not surprised.
No.
We do try to do a lot.
It's a great initiative.
Yeah.
It's one of the most rigid areas of the country, Molenbeek, and they're doing boot camps for ladies, Molenbeek.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Cool.
It's probably, we have them everywhere, so I'm not surprised at all. I might know that one specifically, but...
You should come.
I will come. Invite me. I'll come.
The 12th of November, by the way.
I will come. I'm there.
Did that help to answer? Okay. Before I close, anyone? All right. Well, thank you so much. I like...
Yeah, go.
One more.
On the education standpoint, like back to what I was going to that's like the industry. But like I found in a lot of like my engineering classes and in my school, like in general, like there tends to be less women interested in like STEM and things like that. So and there's less a problem of race at my school. It's really diverse racially wise. But just like getting women interested in STEM, how do you propose we do that at a young age, like high school? Junior high.
I don't really know. It's such a strange thing. Why I don't get it because I just love STEM. I'm a geek, so I don't understand it. Why? What I do know is the importance of role models, and there are lots of role models in the history of computer science, women who have engineered important issues. But regarding as we speak about role models, I think that's more your question, right?
I mean, any one of us can answer this. I would say, so I'll give you my experience. So when I moved to the States, I moved to Charlotte. And again, I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. So I was like, I'm just going to sign up for all the classes that I can. I signed up for a computer science class. Again, didn't really know what to expect. It was an AP computer science. I was like, I'm going to see what it's about. My teacher was a keyboarding teacher who had never taught computer science before. So I spent the whole year, we were just literally just having a good old time in that class. Like everyone had A's because again, weren't doing anything, weren't learning anything, and nothing happened. So just to tell you, for me, it's possible that I could have been great. I was good in math. I could have been great in computer science, but that one experience is what kept me from even exploring it further because I was like, okay, that was such a waste of time. I ain't got time for that. I have to go to college. I have to find something where there's a teacher who knows what's happening. So I think in that sense, having more teachers who are women, but any teachers who are teaching that in schools, hopefully will encourage more students, women, and people of color to just be interested in it. I think that's a step. I know Google has a lot of programs in New York, in the Bay Area, in Oakland, where we're trying to get more kids interested in computer science and get them closer to, like, what does it look like for you to actually put it into action? Because it sounds so like, futuristic, right? But like, there's actual practical things that you can do on your day-to-day with computer science. And so just translating it into things that people know, like women care about. We have girls who code, made with code. Again, making it about things that girls might be interested in. So we just have to be better at thinking about what might interest that group, and let's make it happen for them, or allow them to decide for themselves how they want to use computer science. So I think there's a lot that we can do in that sense.
And glad you care about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I definitely gonna wrap up now because Capital Factory has been so generous having the space for us in this time. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for the sharing today. Enjoy the rest of South by, and hopefully we'll be seeing you around. If you have any questions,
Thank
you
you,
can
Heidi.
come up after.
Yeah, thanks. It was really good. Super. Yeah. I think you know what would be.
Really appreciated the word.
Was good. I got.
I love hearing the international point of view and how you kind of experience things. Thinking of it from like a